again, we are in our study, World Religions, Cults, and the Occult. Number 14, Pastor Bobby.
Witchcraft and the Rise of Wicca.
That's awesome. Isn't it? How's it feel like being back on that front row? It's awesome. That's right. Give it for Pastor Bobby. And I'll tell you what, talk about God's timing. So always gets the right answers. And, of course, being on the front row, if you got poor eyesight, that's where you want to be. I'm not saying nothing, bro. But anyway, that's right. But Witchcraft and the Rise of Wicca, number 14 in our big giant study. We've already seen, of course, the definition of witchcraft. And Wicca is just basically the same thing. That's literally what the term means. We saw the types. We saw the location. We saw the protection. Who's the protection in? Jesus Christ. Hello. And the history. Now, the history went all the way around the world. Okay, and what we saw is basically Wicca, witchcraft, okay, that's nothing new under the sun. That's how they want to pitch it. Oh, it's just this new nature. No, it's not. It's the same old rebellious occult behavior that's been going on ever since the Tower of Babel. We saw that in the Tower of Babel, just like the Bible said, it began to spread across the world. It went from Babylon to Egypt, to Greece, to Rome, to Asia, to India, the island countries, Africa, Latin America. It went to Europe. And then, of course, there in Europe, what we've been seeing is now the history of Wicca, because a lot of modern day Wicca, certainly here in the America, is coming from European witchcraft, okay? But all they've done is just change the name. It's just old-fashioned European witchcraft, okay? And as we see, again, it's eclectic. They'll add some other stuff. But by and large, a lot of it came from Europe. So they may say, all right, well, let's take a look at that. How did this get started? How did they get away with just literally changing the name from witchcraft to Wicca, and so many people are falling for it, even here in the United States? Well, we began to take a look at the history of Wicca, and we saw that basically it started in Europe with this lady, Margaret Murray, known as the grandmother of Wicca. Then it moved to this guy, Gerald Gardner, the Gardnerian branch of Wicca, the grandfather of Wicca. And then we saw, last time I went to Doreen Valiente, the mother of Wicca. And, of course, she was really popular, unfortunately, with the British people. The ban was lifted in 1951, and, boy, she came out of the broom closet, as you can see there, literally. And boy, she began to, she was popular with that, and she's got her own exhibition. It's like it's a good thing. Go see all these things with witchcraft. And, of course, she wrote a bunch of different books. Now, her big things we saw was she took the Book of Shadows from Gardner, okay, the witchcraft manual, and she made it much more palatable for consumption. In fact, she was such a big influence, they said if she didn't do that, then Wicca may never have really gotten off the ground like it is today. So they took a look at her as a big linchpin there. Then it went to America. And two different people, starting with Raymond Buckland. He's the father of America Wicca, witchcraft. Okay, and he was on the East Coast. And, of course, he and his wife were working together as a team in witchcraft. And they basically Americanized Wicca. Okay, Valiente made it more palatable. This guy made it America. And he came up with his own called Sax Wicca. Okay, that people still practice today. And then, of course, he basically wrote his own, my impression of this, his own Book of Shadows. It's called the Big Blue Book, the complete book of witchcraft, but, you know, all that stuff, and that's still being done today. Then it went to the West Coast. He's on the East Coast in Long Island. Then it went to L.A. through this lady, Sybil Leek. So at the same time, you're getting it here in America from coast to coast. And she helped to popularize that. Her work there, Diary of a Witch, was kind of like a breakout moment, if you will, for her. Very much of an eclectic figure. She always traveled with a crow on her, as we saw there. Mr. Hotfoot, or whatever she called that thing we saw last week. And she was literally a celebrity witch. We may not remember her, but during the 60s, she was a celebrity. People loved her and interviewed her on all kinds of shows. And it wasn't just that she was a celebrity. She shared her craft with celebrities, including powerful political figures. And we saw that's nothing new under the sun, because back in England, her mother did the same thing back there in Europe with famous people and bigwigs and figures. And we saw, well, that doesn't go on today, does it? Yeah, witchcraft today, of course, we gave a couple examples. One celebrity example was Tom Brady's wife, him admitting that she is a witch, okay, on tape. And then, of course, went through, there's no political party that's been taken over by the occult, is there? Yeah, and you know what's funny? It's not really funny, but a lot of people, you hear them say the Democrat Party, and, you know, tongue-in-cheek, they'll say, well, it's really the Democrat Party. Well, based on what we saw last week with the invasion of the occult in that party, that's probably more accurate than what people realize. Okay, so what we saw, because they are being influenced, and I didn't say any influence, I think they're being taken over, including the latest movements with the riots and the BLM. We saw all that's being run by witches. We saw the evidence. It sounds crazy. If you didn't see that study, go back and watch it. from last week, part 13. Now we're going to see where it went on from there, okay, on up to modern day. Okay, it went to this guy next, Alexander's. Okay, not Alexander, Alexander. And basically, this guy came up with what was called, again, what we're seeing with Wicca, there's a bunch of different branches. Now, I'm going to use this term lightly because it's our term, so I don't want to say it's, whatever. But basically, like you, let's say you become a Christian, and your next choice is, I need to find a church. But then the next thing you know, you're going like, well, which one? Because there's what? So many, and not just so many different churches, there's so many what? Different denominations. Well, to use that loosely, that's really what's going on in witchcraft. Even with Wicca, there's not just one solid thread, right? If they unfortunately want to make that unfortunate bad choice and say, I'm going to become a witch or follow Wicca, now your next choice is which branch? Is it the traditional witch? Is it Gardnerian? Is it an eclectic witch? Is it, as we're going to see from this guy, he developed what was called Alexandrian witchcraft. Okay, or Wicca, okay? Basically, he was the self-proclaimed king of witches. So we go from the grandmother, grandfather, the father, the celebrity, to the king of witches, okay? But before we get into that, okay, let's once again, shocker, do you think I'm having any trouble finding a verse in the Bible on stay away from witchcraft or the occult? Oh, no, and we ain't even getting close to exhausting them yet. That's why we're studying this, folks, because it's all over the Bible, and we're supposed to study all of it, not just some of it, okay? But our text tonight, once again, a warning from God, don't get involved in this stuff, is 2 Chronicles 33. Turn there if you can. If you can't, have somebody help you. 2 Chronicles 33. And we're going to find verses 1 through 6 there. And we're going to take a look at the account of one of the unfortunate kings of Judah at that time. If you know anything about 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and of course it records the different kings and kingdoms. You got the northern kingdom that split off from the southern kingdom, 10 tribes up north, 2 tribes down south. Okay, and it had highlights. Some were good kings. A lot of them were bad kings. Most of the north kings were bad. Southern kings had a little bit more, but they went south, and of course, eventually both of them went into captivity. But it records the rulers, okay? Now, if you were a ruler of a kingdom, and certainly this was a real guy that we're going to read, this really happened, but imagine for all these years, all these centuries and centuries and centuries, your life was mentioned for all the world to see like this guy. And it's not good. But notice why God has strong words for him, right? You'd hope that you say, well, and he was a great guy, and you always hope that somebody writes a good eulogy for you or something. Not this guy. And this is coming from God. Watch this, right? Chapter 33, 2 Chronicles, verse 1. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became a king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for how many years? 55 years, okay? And he did what? Right out of the gates, man, second verse. How would you like to have this, your name in the first verse, and here comes the rest? And it goes downhill from here. He did evil. Wow, well, let's see what he did. Let's see what was evil in the eyes of who? The Lord, all right? He followed the what kind of practices? Detestable. So now it's evil in the eyes of the Lord, and it is detestable. Whoa, what was it? What was he getting involved in? That God would say such strong words of the nations of the Lord that had driven out before the Israelites. He built the high places that his father Hezekiah had demolished. Hezekiah, of course, was a good one. Something happened. The baton didn't get transferred to the next generation. So Hezekiah, what's the high places? The high places where they went and worshiped the false gods. So Hezekiah did the right thing, got rid of that, and his son comes along and what? He rebuilds it. Oops. Mistake number one. Then he says, he goes on, he even erected altars to who? Baal, and made Asherah poles. Now, of course, as we know the scripture teaches, behind every idol is a what? A demon. So again, so now it's getting involved with demonic stuff and false worship and idols, and it gets even worse. And then, not only that, he says this, he bowed down to all the what? Starry host. Well, I'm a Christian, I'm into astrology, excuse me? No, you better, excuse me? Astrology, folks, is occult stuff. We've been seeing that, okay? He bowed down to the starry hosts, and he worshiped them. And then he built altars where? He wasn't doing that just outside. He brought it into the temple of the Lord. You know, like what you saw before? Christian witches. What are you doing? You're doing the same thing. You think that the two can merge together. No, you can't. That's profane, right? But that's what he did, and he did that in the temple of the Lord. He built altars to all the starry hosts. Whoa, what did he do? He killed his own sons in these occult practices. Does that go on today? Yeah, we saw that. It unfortunately still does. So he killed his sons in the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom, now also known as, I believe, Gehenna. Now Gehenna, okay, was the section in the area there in Jerusalem that was basically a continual dump that burned. And Jesus in the scripture in the New Testament, he basically uses that as a picture and basically says, you want to know what hell is like? Look at Gehenna, where the worm dieth not and the fire doesn't go out. And so that's what he's talking about here. And he says, and then on top of that, he what? He practiced sorcery, divination, and witchcraft, and consulted mediums, and spiritists. And so he did what? He didn't just do evil. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, provoking God to what? Anger. So here's an obvious question. How many guys would say that that's not a good epitaph, that's not a good eulogy you'd like to have? Certainly, right? But if he didn't like it then, and if he considered that to be a detestable practice, and evil in his eyes, no matter what man wants to put a spin on it, okay, even the media, but how does God feel today? It is an evil thing in his eyes, not just back then, same thing today. So let's again take a look at why and how people, even here in America, are still continuing on and increasingly getting involved in this detestable practice called witchcraft, relabeled as Wicca. Well, again, it's this guy, he's our next guy, Alex Sanders, okay? And again, he came up with the Alexandrian tradition, okay? And let me just give you a quick video just to break that down. Traditional witch, gardener, and there's a ton of them, but just let me give you a little idea. What's the difference with that? And again, basically what it is these guys, they start their own coven, they get their own group, and then they put their own spin on it. And then it kind of branches off. So let's take a look at his group called the Alexandrian Wicca. Let's take a look.
Traditional witch. A traditional witch practices. Traditional witches study their ancestors that aligns with their cultural background. Gardnerian witch. The father of Wicca, Gerald Gardner, developed this practice in Britain during the mid-20th century. From his original coven, Brickett's Wood, he passed on his interpretation of witchcraft. As an initiation tradition, only another Gardnerian coven can bring in a new practitioner. This is done and are led by a high priestess and priest. Gardnerians adhere to the story of the horned god dying and being reborn each year as the mother goddess remains eternally alive. Their rituals are highly elaborate, and many of the orthodox covens still practice ritual nudity. Gardnerian covens are quite secretive, so it can be a bit difficult to figure out as a new practitioner. Alexandrian witch. Alex and Maxine Sanders created are very different paths. Alexandrian witches are initiated and organized around a high priestess. The Alexandrian tradition focuses on the ancient archetypes of the oak and holly kings, who battle and win, then battle and lose, to bring out the light and dark, warmth and cold. While not as secretive as their Gardnerian counterparts, Alexandrian witches still place emphasis on tradition and following protocol.
So again, it's just another spin-off of witchcraft. A lot of similarities, but again, you'll have certain aspects, certain groups will focus on this particular aspect of ritual, they won't, or these are a little bit more on this side, a little bit more hierarchical in structure. These are a little bit more free-willing in structure, but that's basically what it is. It was after he was fine. I'm not saying he actually said this, but I'm saying basically went and said, okay, I'm going to start my own. Okay, so that's basically what was going on. Now, he was a so-called psychic with a flamboyant style. He was the most public witch in Britain. All kinds of headlines were given to him about his supposed sensational acts of magic, witchcraft. He was born in Manchester, the oldest of 6 children. His father was an entertainer, an alcoholic. And listen to this. By Sanders' own account, when he was 7, he discovered that his grandmother, a lady named Mary Bibby, standing naked in the kitchen in the middle of a circle drawn on the floor. Right? So listen to this. Imagine you're a kid, 7 years old, you walk into the kitchen and your grandmother is naked with most likely a pentagram or who knows what, some witch circle Then revealed to him that she was a hereditary witch. Obviously, you're going to have to come up with something while you're naked in the thing, and did that to him. Wow. Then she gave him her book of the shadows, again back from Gardnerium, which she copied, taught him the rites and the magic of witches, and then he began to discover his own so-called psychic abilities, clairvoyance, and, quote, healing touches, okay? That with his special powers now he can heal people. Now, I'll give you some examples in a little bit, but I want to answer that question. Wait a second. Can witches, can Satanists, can sorcerers, people involved in the occult, okay? Satan has power, and so if you will, Satan, all he can do is magic. Now, he's got power, but it ain't like God. Pressed to find someone who's never heard of some kind of religious miracle. For instance, he says many Catholics are convinced that the validity of the very sightings of the Virgin Mary around the world are a miracle. The stigmata that appear in people's hands, they've been being pierced. Or we says, I think it was the birds eating out of the tomato patch. Remember that was so funny? Yeah, whatever. But anyway, so weeping, bleeding statues. There are reported miracles, not just in Catholicism, which is not biblical Christianity, right? But other religions, even in Hinduism, Buddhism, even Islam, they say, oh no, we got miracles, and they attest to that. Okay, and the same thing in witchcraft. Oh no, see, we got real power. People are being healed. So is that really going on? And again, we dealt with that in our New Age study in Hinduism with remember the guy that could do the holy ash and all that stuff and the sleight of hand and all the stuff that was going on. But Satan does have power, the father of all lies, but he can appear as an angel of light. And he uses his power to draw people away from God, right? When people go to a Marian apparition, is that drawing them to you? Right? And then they start throwing money to it and they pray to it. Is that drawing them to God? No. Hinduism, Buddhism, when these guru guys supposed to do all this healing and special acts, they make candy appear and people eat it, as we saw before. Is that drawing them close to the history part? They did perform miraculous signs to confirm that their message was from God. Now, we did see that the Magi of Egypt in the beginning could replicate the first few, but what happened? Eventually, God's snake ate up theirs. They did have power to do some things that could deceive people, right? So that's the same thing. In fact, what's interesting, and this is why I believe Revelation 9 talks about people, as we already dealt with that text, in the 7-year tribulation, they will not stop worshiping demons. And there's going to be pharmakeia, speaking of sorcery, witchcraft, the occult, drugs that goes along with that as well, right? Witchcraft is not so surprisingly on the rise because that's going to be in the 7-year tribulation. And the Antichrist is going to tap into that community, including the occult, okay, and those looking for signs and wonders, which is even big in the charismatic movement, as we already dealt with, and he's going to dupe people, right? During the tribulation, the Antichrist will sometimes going to be characterized by treachery, counterfeit prophets, false teachers, great signs and wonders to deceive, Matthew 24. Okay, and this is why the Bible says that when somebody comes up to you and says, wow, that's a miracle, that's incredible what that happened, you are to quote 1 John 4:1, what? Test all the spirits to see whether or not this is from God. Okay, and so if you have any doubt, you need to go back to the Scripture, and if it lines up the Scripture, if it points people to God, points them to Jesus Christ, okay, that's one thing. But if it doesn't, even on one thing, well, most of it does, it's got to be 100%. Okay. But so my point is, I wanted to bring that up because, again, these people, that's how they seduce. Well, look at this. We've got power. And this person was healed with our special witchcraft techniques. And that doesn't mean it's from God, right? So just because there's supposed miracles or whatever, this is from him. He reportedly got, rid of warts. And it was a 2-bang punch, Ron. Watch this. He didn't just get rid of warts. He got rid of them by wishing them on someone else who was already ugly. Now, that's mean. That's mean, okay? Whatever, that's supposed to be a miracle, according to that. He claimed to cure a man of a heroin addiction. He claimed to cure a woman by laying his hands on her head, and the affliction went away. He also said he cured a young woman with stomach cancer by sitting with her in the hospital for 3 days and nights, holding her feet and pouring healing energy into her. Right? And he said, quote, pointing, he said, never failed. Now, this next one tells you, obviously, where this is coming from. Because another thing that he, quote, boasts, you shouldn't be boasting in this one. He said he claimed to be able to have the ability to give Satan's not just a liar. We just quoted the text, John 8. He's what? He's a murderer. Who was born with her left foot twisted backwards. The doctor said, there's nothing we could do. Anoint her foot. He did so, then twisted her foot straight, and voila, the foot remained corrected. Janice walked normally, except, and that was supposed to be one of his most famous ones. Whatever. Early on, he worked as a chemist, believe it or not, talked about her and that supposed healing. Now, who does that sound like? Much greater detail, magic of witchcraft, right? Now, that's why you have in the Baphomet, which is pictured here, you have one hand going one direction, one going the other. One's the left-hand path, one's the right-hand path. Now, how they break it out, they say the left-hand path is black magic or black shamanism, while the right-hand path is benevolent white magic. But excuse me, it's all coming from the same beast. Right? It's all bad. But that's what they mean. So he goes the black magic left-hand route for power. Now, just so you know, again, we might get into this much greater deeper in our Satanism study, but they basically, a left-hand path person that goes down that route, on top of what he's already doing, basically they reject the status quo of anything. And anything that goes against the norm, anything that is morally correct, morally good, they do the exact opposite on purpose. Okay, is their path. And they believe that when they do these things of taboo, that gives them the opposite of what is right. Right? If God says don't kill, what do? Kill. If God says don't commit adultery, what do? Adultery. They do the exact opposite because they believe that that's going to give them more power. Okay, that's a left-hand path person. They question religious, moral dogma, and of course they embrace all kinds of, was originated here in the West from this lady we saw in our New Age. She traveled around the world. She went to Asia, as we saw in our history study. What was in Asia? Witchcraft and occult, just like every country. Then she also goes to India and Tibet, and what was also there. Developed the left-hand path. She translated it and their practices and basically Americanized it, okay, from the Indian tantric practice. And that Indian tantric practice basically emphasizes you break Hindu societal taboos, basically what they say, you do the opposite, right? And then they were already engaged in it. She just, kind of like Valiente cleaned up the book and then Buckland kind of Americanized. Okay, that's what she's doing with the Indian and occult practices, and then she's bringing it over to America. But they also have sexual intercourse in their rituals. They drink alcohol, eating meat. Of course, in India, that's not a big, they believe that's your relative, but they do it because it's the opposite. They assemble in graveyards, and all that is part of the practice. So she basically brings that over to America, and that begins to spread. And of course, that's one of the many things that this Alexander, and again, this developed into a branch that's still going on today in Wicca called Alexandrian Wicca, right? We don't worship Satan. Now, there is a misnomer that the horned god is necessarily Satan. Okay, I'll give you that. That's not necessarily. And we'll get into that eventually. Who is this horned god? But number one, this practice of witchcraft, any occult practice, anything that comes outside the Bible is inspired by who? Satan, number one. But you are going to find people involved in witchcraft and Wicca who literally do, as he admitted, they worship Satan. And I'm going to show you that on tape in just a second. Because that's a misnomer. Oh, you can't say we have nothing to do with Satan, man. This is just worshiping the Mother Earth, the goddess, and nature. No, it's not, okay? Now, before I get into that proof, he also got into another one. So again, this guy's picking up all kinds of bad stuff, man. And he's making it into his own religion. Egypt, what was going on there? Occult, witchcraft also. And by a guy named Abraham, or Abramelin, hence the name, who taught a system of magic to a Jewish guy in Germany, is how the story goes in this book. Presumably, he lived supposedly 1362 to 1458, and it gained popularity, this book, in the 19th and 20th century. So again, Alexander gets involved in this aspect too. Now, this book is more written like a novel or an autobiography, and basically it describes this guy Abraham going from Germany to Egypt, that is in this book that Sanders got into, such as the purpose is to obtain knowledge and conversation of a magician's guardian angel. So you want to connect with your guardian angel. Of course, it's not a guardian angel, it's a what? It's a demon. And quote, after you go through these rituals in this book, it's completed, your guardian angel will appear and reveal magic secrets. Well, an angel from God ain't going to do that. So that tells you what you're dealing with. But that's what's in this book. And then, once that's accomplished, the magician must evoke, quote, the 12 kings and dukes of hell including Lucifer, Leviathan, and Belial, and bind them. Have fun with that. You're the one that's now bound, involved in that stuff. So he gets involved in that. Okay? And it's going to get even worse. But soon, believe it or not, he found some people to support him financially. He starts taking off. His coven not only got launched, which he claimed to have 1,623 initiates at this time, 100 different covens going. But then he began to get media attention. And he's attracting more followers and all that stuff. So again, media helped him to get out there. Then he was elected basically the king of witches. The media ran with that and basically said he's the king of all witches. And boy, he liked that. Blood spirit baby. You're going, what's that? Well, this takes us back to our sign through a practice. He did this, he so-called created a flesh and blood spirit baby in a rite of sex magic with the help of a male assistant. So whatever they were doing. Okay, well, you know, what's sex magic? Well, again, basically, sometimes spelled M-A-G-I-C-K, it's basically sex in